Smartsheet has powerful automations. They're able to communicate in many ways to users inside and outside your organization. But leveraging Control Center can complicate how you use notifications. Today, we're going to cover how to scale automations properly. We'll first cover how to set it up with Control Center, what the limitations are, and then finally, some tips on how to design your automations to scale well. So let's first cover how automations work with Control Center. When you're creating a Control Center solution, Smartsheet automatically duplicates the entire folder full of all your assets, up to about 100, but usually we don't recommend above 75 assets inside your folder. When it is duplicating it, basically the rules for how you duplicate a sheet are the same, and it's doing it at a massive scale. So if you're creating 10 projects, you're duplicating whatever automation rules you built 10 times. So it's crucial to set your automations up in a way that can easily be duplicated and hopefully manipulated as well from afar. Some limitations around scaling your automations is that when you're duplicating hundreds of projects, you now have many different places to update, and you unfortunately cannot use code to do it. There is no bulk way to edit notifications in Smartsheet today. So when we're having to retroactively change many notifications in a portfolio, we find that it is a very annoying manual job. So I highly recommend thinking through your notifications and knowing that once you start duplicating your project, you're going to have a lot of work if you have to make changes to it. So here are some tips on how to properly manage your notifications so that you can control them from a portfolio level and hopefully have minimal changes you need to make at the actual project by project level. You can see here in my diagram, the intake sheet is able to link data into the metadata sheet. It can link it to all sheets, but I recommend sending most of your data to the metadata sheet and then letting that get distributed to the other sheets. If you have to create a summary section in every sheet, it's going to make it harder for your users to know exactly where they should update. I find it best to keep everything centralized coming from your intake and then dispersing it to the various sheets. Now, when you're setting up a portfolio, I recommend using the intake sheet to handle a few of the important options with notifications. Let's say you have a project that could go on hold. And when that project goes on hold, you don't want notifications to go off, even if someone's editing in them. I recommend creating a few fields in your intake that can manage that process. So one is the ability to turn off and on the notifications. That means that from the intake for that specific project, you could switch it off. And you can do that by sending the data to the metadata sheet, and then every single project sheet is looking at the metadata to know, should I have automations on or off? The same for weekly or daily. So let's say that maybe if the project's in an aggressive state and you're really needing to keep a lot of attention towards it, it's in a daily basis. But let's say maybe the project is a little bit on the back burner. Maybe you want to set the notifications to a weekly basis. I recommend creating multiple notifications inside your project plan or inside any project asset that can basically be activated by one of these two. We'll show you in a moment how that works. And finally, context. Let's say that the project manager wants good visibility via automation on any project that's being managed by them. You could make it so that from the intake, you could change that contact, and that person now gets notified for every item in the project. So these are 3 different ways to communicate information to all the various project assets you have. And I can tell you that when you have hundreds of projects, the ability to simply say, hey, these 10 projects are going to be turned off for now as far as automations is really powerful. Instead of having to go through maybe, let's say, 5 different sheets inside those projects, that means 50 different sheets you have to visit and go and turn off the automation. That's no fun. So let's look a little deeper into what the project plan would look like with these automation tools. So For starters, you can see my project plan is a normal setup on a project plan, yet I have these two columns over here. One is notifications enabled. It's just a checkbox. If it's checked, that means that any notification can go out. Notification frequency. Right now you see I have it set to weekly. So now let's take a look at what the notifications would look like. With my weekly notification, I first have it make sure that it is enabled, and then I make sure that it is also a weekly notification. So these two criteria have to be met before it actually notifies. And the power you have here is that if you turn off notifications, none of these automations will be going off. So I highly recommend thinking ahead on what is going to have to be activated, deactivated, what type of frequency you have. I'm just giving an example, but you can imagine how you could set up your own automations. You could also be having it so that it runs on a weekly basis or daily basis, with basically using when a date is reached and a custom field here. So you have a lot of flexibility to set up inside your project plan or any other project asset. But it's very important to think ahead of what types of options you need to manage at the portfolio level. Going back to the sheet for a second, it's important that it's actually covering every single row, because wherever the automation is triggered, you basically have a row with information that can either activate or deactivate it and so forth. So this formula actually looks back at the metadata sheet and identifies if it's checked or not checked. That metadata sheet then goes all the way back to the intake, where you have a column that says on or off for the notifications. And however you want to label it, you can understand that with this power, you can manage your projects from the portfolio view. And we find it's best to create a report for the intake that just manages these pieces. It's not like you only have to do it for notifications. There are plenty of ways that you can manage your entire project from the portfolio by switching off and on various features. If you have more questions on this, feel free to comment below, and don't forget to subscribe.